Maybe I should tell you a bit about our faculty as well. The Faculty of IT has, it's a newer faculty out of the faculty, so I think it's slowly emerged over various things where it may have been with engineering and it kind of split. I've only been at Monash for a year and a bit. I came from Warwick in the UK to Australia, worked for University of Melbourne. In my short time here, I set up an institute for cybersecurity at New South Wales, and I'm now here at Monash and hoping to stay here and stay for a lot longer. Now I feel like I've done the things I need to do elsewhere. And so the Faculty of IT is split into 3 departments. So I was saying to Amanda, we don't have schools in ours, but essentially they're schools, but for want of a better name, and in terms of the whole, what I'm learning about the Monash structure and all the rest. So we have 3 departments, one in data science and AI, another one looking at human-centered computing, and the third one, which is the one that I lead, is the software systems and cybersecurity, which has 3 groups within that: a software engineering group, a systems and data engineering, and a cybersecurity group. And the as you probably would know, cybersecurity is something on a massive growth at the moment in terms of the education, but also the research. We're so far behind in securing things, which is why it's really important. In that story about where we are and what we do, I'm actually a psychologist, so that makes things a little bit different again. And so I guess it's unusual for a woman leading a department, although Monash is a bit more ahead of the times in terms of women in leadership, I would say. But also a woman in cybersecurity is a little bit odd, and then I'm a psychologist on top of that. So I work on very big interdisciplinary projects. So in the UK, I led very big projects, bringing on computing scientists, like people who specialize in NLP, people that do crypto, people that do deep learning stuff. And so working with the theory in psychology and the understanding of humans, and doing the science around the studies about humans, and how does that work when we're developing methods to prevent and detect and stop those criminals getting us, I guess. So this talk is actually, I don't usually cheat like this. Usually every talk is a new talk. I have to say I'm guilty on this one, I'm really sorry. But it will be new in the sense that I'm going to edit it down so it won't be as long. It was from a keynote I had to do recently. So, but hopefully you'll get in the flavour for this about humans being complex beings. Often my beef with computing scientists is they'll develop software and other things and methods to deal with issues about humans without understanding the human. And then we get all the blame for it as well, right? When it all goes wrong, you stupid human, how come you didn't do it right? And that's because these people aren't understanding the science behind the humans. So I've got to give you a little bit of a flavour about it. You don't have to be an expert on this, but just to give you an idea. I guess my real domain of expertise is cyber psychology, understanding the humans with technology. But what I like to always do in the research I do is not pretend we didn't know stuff before there was digital stuff around, because humans were still humans before that. And often we get these, popular papers come out going, oh gosh, look at this person on the internet. But these people were doing these things before. And I think in the area, one of the areas that I do research on is on cyber scams. I also do misdisinformation and insider threat work, and online identities. But with scams, they've existed a long time before there was an internet. How many people here in this room have ever been scammed, even if it's a small amount of money? Yeah. It's becoming more and more common. And then there's people that have been scammed that don't realise it. Is there anyone here who hasn't ever come across a scam, a fish or anything else? No. Yeah, when I first started doing research in this area, it was very uncommon, which makes me really depressed because it means that all the work that I've done is to no avail because we're getting more scans, not fewer. So anyway, we keep trying. Um, One of the examples I'm going to give to you about scams is Victor Lustig. Have you heard of Victor at all? So Victor, in fact, I just did the Eiffel Tower tour this summer, but I've been giving talks about Victor long before that, but they like to tell everyone about him because what Victor did was he tried to sell the Eiffel Tower twice for scrap metal. And that seems bizarre to us that think, oh, wow, the Eiffel Tower is amazing, beautiful. But the Parisians never liked it and probably still don't like that. So they see it as a bit of an eyesore. So it was built for the World Fair, World Expo, and after it all happened, then he made up the story that we're going to bring it down because obviously Parisians don't like it. So there's a bit of truth. There's always a bit of truth in a scam. So he tried to sell it off to businessmen and got a lot of money out of it. So not only once, but he had another go at it. And the first person that was scammed didn't tell anyone because he was really embarrassed and ashamed. Have we not heard those stories before with scams? So, so you can scam anything on anything, really. I think is a good story there. Here are a few others, but I'll tell you about the cup and ball scam because you may have seen that scam. Have you ever seen that one? When you go overseas, and this is another story from my trip to Paris because I've been telling my young daughter about this over time, and we were walking past and we saw them on the street with this, and she goes, "Oh, mummy, this is the scam you told me about." I'm like, "Yeah, it's the scam. It's the scam." I said, "Do you want to have a look?" She goes, "Oh, I don't want to go near the criminals." I said, "It'll be all right." So we're walking past, and then the guy points to me, and it's like, oh, I was only going to watch the scam other people, not go at me. And he says, "Madam," because there was a Confederate, obviously, not that other people probably knew that in the audience who had got it wrong. And he said, "Which one was it under?" And I said, "It's under that one." And he goes, "Yes." And he doesn't even show it first. He goes, "Yes, it is." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you." And he goes, "So," and he brings out this wad of cash. He goes, "Here you go." I'm like, "Oh, okay, thanks." He goes, "No, no, no, no." And in his French accent, which I couldn't understand completely well, and unfortunately I'm not able to speak French very well, he says to me, "Well, show me the money." I'm like, "Yeah, thank you." And he said it again. I thought he meant he wants me to share it with everyone. So I'm like, "Here you go, everyone. You can have the money. Thank you very much." He goes, "No, no." And I'm like, "What do you want from me?" He says, "Can you speak English?" I'm like, "Oh, it's the only language I can talk." So "I want you to show me your money." I'm like, this is where you're coming in with the scam, right? I'm like, "I'm not going to show my money. I don't have any money to show." He says, "Well, you can't have this unless you give me your money." And it's like, what would have happened is I would have won that hand and he would have forced me to play it again and I would have lost the next one. I said, no, thank you. I'll give you back your money." And there was a woman in the audience screaming, "You're a loser, you're a loser." And it's like, because the whole audience has been part of the theatrics of this, and there is a lot of theatrics in a scam. So it's interesting. And these are scams that are in the face-to-face world, so they do exist. There's a whole lot of famous scams that have happened, and you've probably heard the Ponzi scams. Bernie Madoff is a famous person who is believed to have the record for scamming the most amount of money from this particular scam, if that's a record you want. They did a movie on him. I don't know if you've seen it at all. But what's interesting about him and looking at his life, which is not uncommon with successful scammers, is he brought family and friends in and none of them knew. They were all shocked. They lost money to him. They thought he was a successful businessman because that was the identity he was giving and the story that he was selling very, very well until it all fell apart. So we do have them. Now, I've told you the story that I moved to Melbourne maybe it's about 4 or 5 years ago. And I unfortunately moved at the time the next year we went into COVID. So anyway, COVID gave scammers the opportunity to scam a lot more people in a lot of different ways. And those of us in lockdown were presented with a lot more scams because our lives had changed, and we have to do things differently. Shopping online, for instance, was not possible to do it any other way for certain things. And also when you're under stress and anxiety, we make poor decisions. So we know that about humans. So there was a whole lot of things that happened during COVID that you probably came across. People buying things that weren't legitimate, not receiving goods, etc. But there's a whole host of scams that have existed over time. Lottery scam is one that hits a lot of old people, where they're told you've won the lottery, and it's sent in postal mail as well as email, and you've won the Spanish lottery, and for a small amount of money you can have all this money, and then it gets stuck. Actually we've got to get lawyers in now, but you'll still get, €1 million euros or whatever. So and people keep putting the money in. And so the technique in that particular scam is called advance fee fraud, because people think that they're going to get a huge sum at the end of it. So they're not giving money away just for money's sake, but they think they're going to get something back at the end. And of course they don't. And one of the problems is they stick with it because they have the belief is eventually we'll get there and we'll get it back. And it's actually very hard to pull people out of scams when they're in them. So you can tell them. And in the UK, I used to work with the Serious Organised Crime Agency, together with my academic job, just helping them out. And we'd go to people's houses through intelligence. We knew that they'd been scammed, and they just wouldn't believe it. It was really, really hard, and really sad. Nigerian email scam, everyone's probably heard of that. That actually existed before paper and pens, before the internet, as letter scams. And in fact, one of the cases I worked with in the UK, this guy had been scammed for many years before it even became an email one, and he kept all the papers in order of the whole lot that had been done. And he was I get a cluster of really chronic cases that they'll never be able to see or understand that this is a scam, and they keep getting presented and presented because they're on their suckers list. And one of the arguments that I've worked with a philosopher about is that we have to use paternalistic methods sometimes with people, because nothing will stop them. And they're going to lose all their money, they're going to lose, everyone around them. Then maybe for a better life, we have to not let them do these things. And the banks are starting to think a bit like that now with scams. They do that with gambling, and I'm doing some work with CBA looking at that kind of issue as well. The main scam that I've done a lot of work on over the years is the romance scam. And has anyone not heard of the romance scam here? So yep, okay, yep, oh good, one person left. Yeah, they also call it the sweetheart scam in America. And what it is that someone believes that they're forming a relationship with someone they've met online. Now, people formed relationships with people online before these scams existed, so that's not so bizarre. But the person creates a fake profile, and they might meet on a dating site, they might meet through LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. And they start to talk to that person, and that person has a picture that's attractive, but it's not them. And the person that they describe is not the person, or where they're living, or any of those things. And so over time, they fall deeply in love with them. And at the point where they've groomed them to the point that they really are in their hands, they will ask for a small gift to test the waters. And once that happens, they know they've got them. And they really do have them. That is the hardest scam to get people out of once they're in that mode. And they give so much money. Part of the stories is that, I'm a general in the army, and wherever that particular war is happening at the time. One of them was Afghanistan, was popular. And I'm American, I can't get out, but I've fallen in love with you. I trust you, I'm going to send you my possessions and my money, and I want you to look after them, because when I get out, I'm going to live with you and marry you, etc. And these bags, supposed bags, are meant to be sent, and then they get a phone call, the victim does, saying, oh, we've got your bags in customs. Some of the stories were saying in Ghana or Nigeria, and it's like, I'm not sure how that happened through Afghanistan, but anyway. We need to, the diplomatic seals have run out. So we need you to give us a little bit of money so that you can get these bags sent to you. And of course, it's only a little bit of money. So it's like, okay, all right, I'll help my husband or wife to be and send them through. All right, so then it's like, oh, we didn't get it in time. We x-rayed the bags and we found gold in them or money in them. It's like, so then they speak to the general or whatever and say, well, they haven't come out, but they've got gold in them. Yeah, I didn't want to tell you that because, you know, I trust you so much that it's like, I want you to have this, even if things don't work out. I love you so much. I just want you to have that. So if you can pay the money to customs, we'll get that released to you. And then a lawyer comes into the story. And if that's not big enough, then they get shot and they need medical attention. And the story continues on and on and on. And it's hard for people to understand, how could anyone be conned by that scam? But for many years, up until maybe the last 2 years, it was a number one scam, cyber scam. And people mortgaged their houses and everything, thinking they would get their money back. It's not just for their loved one, but they would get their money back. And part of the story is that the money was acquired through illegitimate means. So now they're in cahoots with the person that they are in love with. So they're less likely to tell others. And so they're very complicated stories. People get kidnapped. I worked with women who have been kidnapped in Ghana for it. Just absolute terrible things that happen to them, and they'll never get that money back. And that's the hardest thing to be able to tell people. That's it. And when you say that, actually, part of the harder thing for them is the acceptance that that person isn't who they are and they didn't love them, because they really fell deeply in love with them. And, you know, some will say, well, sometimes the criminal comes back to them, not unusually actually, and says, yes, I was scamming you, it's true, but I fell in love with you during that time. And then, woof. And you say that to them, you say to the victim, they will come back, and they will, no, and then it goes again. So I laugh at it as a way of coping, but it is very tragic. And there's many other scams. The puppy scam was a big one during COVID. It existed way before COVID. It hit America years before, very popular there. The idea that you're buying a puppy, obviously COVID, everyone wanted a COVID puppy. And you think you're buying a good breed, you spent your time doing your research, and they're cute. They're so cute. So it's like, oh, I've spent my money for the puppies, but that's not all you spend. You spend the money on the puppy gets stuck, like everything in these scams. And it's like, oh, it's stuck in quarantine, we need help. Now it's, we've got to put it on the plane, now it's stuck on the runway and it needs aircon, and if we don't do that, it's going to die. And you see all these stories, and it's like, and people respond very quickly because the technique they're using is urgency and a visceral response. So they're trying to make you go, oh, I must help my wee puppy out, otherwise he will die. And he's cute. So, you know, so that's part of the problem, isn't it? And I'll flick through. Did I? Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. That one's a common one in Queensland, actually. The cow scam. I had to explain that on ABC radio cans about them so that they would not buy the fake cows online. So yeah, it's not so weird. This person I wanted to talk to you about, Maria Exposto. I was the expert witness on her case. She was another romance scam victim. I was in the UK at the time, but she's actually Australian. And she was wrapped up in a scam. She didn't give a lot of money. She didn't have any to give, really. But she fell in love with this guy, another general, and she was told that she needs to sign papers to get him out of the army. And this is not an uncommon part of this story. These happen a lot. The women that were caught up in Ghana that were kidnapped were having to sign off such papers. So she goes off to Shanghai, and I know from the outsider's perspective it seems ridiculous, but it's those small increments of believability to sign off these papers. And she turns up to a hotel that she's been told has been paid for and booked for 3 nights. She's never travelled like this before. It was a big thing for her to go to Shanghai, a foreign country, and do this. And she turns up and they've only booked it for 1 night and she's got no money. She's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? She manages to get online and talk to what she thinks is her loved one. Somehow someone rings her and says, don't worry, we've sorted it. We've got the 3 nights for you. So even when I was taking the stand in Malaysia where she was caught, she had no idea this is the plan that they were putting her through. So they're trying to distract her and think, okay, I'm worried about the hotel. I'm not worried about this other thing of signing a paper for someone in Shanghai. The person that's meant to do the papers doesn't turn up. And of course, as part of the story, none of it's real. Someone else turns up and so she signs the papers and she's going to catch the plane. He says to her, oh, look, I'll drive you to the airport. And she's like, oh, thank you. I know we've done the papers. I'm really grateful, of course. And then at the airport, he says, oh, look, it's a few days before Christmas. My family live in Melbourne. That's where she's from. Can you give them this bag with the presents in it for them? And she looks at the bag and she sees some plastic with some clothes in there and goes, sure. Gets transits in Malaysia, doesn't have to walk out, but she's not used to travelling and does, enters back in, volunteers her bags to be caught, and she has ice in her bags. And she says to them, how can that be? I've been in Shanghai, it would have melted by now. So that's how naive she was. This is not possible. And they had to explain to her. And so she was up to be executed for this crime of drug trafficking, which is why they used her as a pawn in this. And I've seen many more cases since. Fortunately, my testimony helped get her off, so she's okay now, and she's back in Australia, and that's all good and great. But you can see how people can be driven by these things and the absolute tragedy that can happen. And what happens is that the criminals will sell them off, the victims off to different ones. So she would have started off with someone trying to scam her out of money, unsuccessful. He would have sold them off, or that gang would have sold them off to someone else who does drug trafficking, and that's their specialty. So, yeah. So, yeah. So I guess you can see the harms are multiple. Financial is obviously a big one, but there's psychological, there's shame, embarrassment, guilt, loss of trust, anxiety, depression, and unfortunately, suicide in some cases as well. And sometimes the stories I've heard about suicide were in the romance scam case, not about the money, but about the story that they were told that their loved one had died or something like that, and that connection with them is so deep. So it's an important one to work on, I think. And at least romance scam is starting to decrease a bit. But during COVID, obviously, it was on the increase again because people are forming relationships online. That's the only way they can if they want to find someone at that point in time. In psychology and other disciplines, just like physics, we have theories that we test out. And so some of the theories in this area come from criminology, and that's been the main kind of discipline to look at this. And I find some of these theories a little bit unsatisfactory because I think we need to understand humans are complex beings and we need to understand them in the equation for this. So one of the very, very popular theories is that fraud happens because you have a criminal who's motivated by a financial problem. Scammers actually work together and they see it as a job, really. And people who have a financial problem don't have to commit fraud. So I find that unsatisfactory in itself. Although when you look at some of where these crimes have been are very popular and emanated from, especially West Africa, there is a lot of poverty in those countries. And actually being a fraudster in that country, although families will frown upon it, the culture enables it a little bit because it helps the community, the money. And the witch doctor comes in and says, you should let your son do this or daughter do this. So there's a lot more to this than something like this will tell you. An opportunity, a single event, well, all crimes, give you some opportunity. I don't think this tells us very much. And they'll say that they use the defense mechanism, rationalization. And in psychology, we know everyone uses rationalization for stuff we're not proud of that we've done. Oh, well, I did that because, we give ourselves excuses. And in some ways, Freud would say there's nothing wrong with that because we need to be able to cope and deal with certain things as well. So I think it's a bit too a simpler theory. I'm going to go to the model that I've put together looking at this. And what I've argued, and this is through many different studies over time, is that we find that there's a psychological profile that makes people more vulnerable to different types of scams. In some ways, we're all vulnerable to scams. So I've been looking at the different types of ones. And it does give us some power in prediction, but there's a lot of other variants there too that needs to be explained. So that's part of it. Heuristics are kind of techniques that the criminals use to trick people, that they use a story that fits the social norms. So when you're falling in love, they fit the social norms of falling in love. When you're finding an investment, same kind of thing. They develop scripts in the story to be able to be successful. They sell those scripts for a lot of money. And now we have ChatGPT. It can create the scripts for them. They were doing that long before we ever heard of ChatGPT in the normal in our lay audience, I guess. What they also do is that they erode guardianship. So the people that could support them are being pushed out. They're being told, don't trust them, don't trust them. This love is real. This investment is real. The other thing I would say, although I started saying scams existed long before there was an internet, there is something about the features of the space that make these more powerful online. I'll see what I can quickly get through just for some examples. I might just go, okay. Just the example of a romance scam victim, the profile of them. These are over a series of different studies. Measures of impulsivity, so acting quickly before thinking, that's not so surprising, especially on the submeasures of urgency and sensation seeking. They tend to score high on addictive measures. So I think that's kind of interesting that I refer to some of these scams as having the near-win phenomena, the idea that if you put one more bit of money in, you think you're going to win, like gambling. And they're kind of set up that you only just missed out. So the person was going to come and visit you on the airplane. They bought the boarding pass. You saw the boarding pass, and they're legitimate boarding passes, but then they can sell them off again. And then they don't turn up because they're in a car accident or something. So that's where your near-win phenomena happens. And in gambling, slot machines are set up that way. You probably know that. So you'll have a lemon, lime, and people think, oh, I almost got there. The reality is you didn't almost get there. It was deliberately set up to make you think that way, so you'll continue gambling. So all those things are part of the profile of the victim. But what I also find probably the strongest predictor out of looking at the psychological profile is the romantic beliefs. So the idea that, and we all have different beliefs, romantic beliefs. There's a nice scale developed. And this one is the the idolation of someone, the absolute, looking for the absolute perfect Mills and Boons kind of person for you. So those people who score very highly on that scale are more likely. So that's their belief system that drives them. So I'm not going to give you everything, but here's one, because I know we're almost up for time too. You don't need to know the whole story. It's just to give you an idea of some of this stuff. But the heuristics, I think, might be interesting to point out. So heuristics are mental shortcuts we have in life, and mental shortcuts we need to do. So every time you make a decision, you have to think about it. But some of those decisions aren't, you don't want to labor your time over them. So for example, going shopping, you know, you have to decide what you want to buy. One of the things that my husband gets very annoyed with, and he just tried to train me, not terribly successfully, is to avoid the middle shelf. It's like the middle shelf is where the more expensive stuff is. I remember one time when he told me, look, which beans are you going to buy? I'm like, those are the only ones there. It's like, there's one underneath. I was like, oh, he says, what price are they? Oh yeah, they're cheaper. But that's the way that their sort stores are set out, to get you to make that decision very quickly, because you haven't got time to waste doing that. So heuristics that's what we do in life. But some things we do need to take our time with. But what the criminals do is use these techniques to push you to feel confidence in your decision making, so you don't question it so much. So for instance, in some of the romance stories, they'll have a person in authority. It might be that the loved one is a general in the army. They're not someone that's just an ordinary officer. They'll bring in a lawyer. They'll bring in a medical person, someone that you would respect, that you would think, of course, they would be saying something important and the truth. So scarcity is the other one, like investments. If you don't invest now, you'll miss out on that opportunity. So these are the sorts of things. You can see them in marketing all the time, but this is what the criminals very cleverly do. I talked about the near-win phenomena. There's also ones where there's usually a little bit of truth with everything. So if you see a bit of truth, you're more likely to believe and not think more about it. I know that's true, therefore must be, the rest of it that I don't know must be true too. And that happens with misinformation all the time as well. So the other thing too is this cognitive dissociation happens, and yes, I have it in the next slide. So early days, because the technology is getting so much better, it's not so easy to tell anymore. Victims are sent a picture that's been photoshopped like this. So this is the original one. This is the one they get. And you say to them, oh, can you see there's something a bit wrong with that picture? No, that's him. That's him. That's his face. That's him. Anything. No, and you point out, well, this neck, it's not quite, oh, yeah. And they just don't see it. And the thing is, with cognitive dissonance, we all employ that too. So I think we have to be careful not to think, oh, these stupid victims, because we do it all the time in our lives. Something that we have a strong belief about, when we don't have the evidence to support it, we still want to believe and say, well, okay, we don't have that evidence. That might contradict that. So a good example of that, and I don't mean to offend, but it's something interesting to think about, is religion. People have very strong beliefs in religion, but there's lots of things that might contradict that belief. And there's lots of things that aren't given that can give you, is there a God? Well, you've not seen this God, And so again, I'm not trying to dismiss religion or anything like that, but just to help people understand, we all hold beliefs without necessarily having all the evidence for it. All right, so I'm going to finish off talking about the features of the media. So I started off saying about scams at the beginning. They all existed beforehand, but there's something about the internet and digital communications that actually helps the criminals out. One of the things is obviously volume. There's more people to get to, people that they'd never meet otherwise. But the others are that it's a recordable medium. That's actually quite a big thing, because when something is written and it's there for you to see over and over and over again, it becomes a thicker story to people. It becomes more real and more powerful. And so when you have a fleeting comment said to you, and often, you know, even when people are falling in love and the flirting is ambiguous and all those things, these aren't. So they become very powerful. And a theorist in communications called Joe Walter, he talked about, before these scams were coming about, hyper-personal relationships, that people can fall in love online and they can fall in love more quickly and more strongly than perhaps in the physical realm. And partly because it's recordable, partly because you can control things online, and partly because they're communicating with them a lot too. But the other thing that Joe talks about is that when we fall in love with someone, or we develop trust with people, because this works with the investment scams and other things too. When we develop a relationship with someone, we disclose to them. And the more we disclose, the closer we get. So this can be ramped up online. And that's how these things happen, these hyper-personal relationships happen. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that putting a whole lot of factors together, that really we have a big model here of those are some of the things I've talked about how these particular scams work. I'm not going to bore you with the rest of the details. That's just to give you a bit of a flavour for some of this stuff, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
You're obviously a bit of an expert on this, so have you ever been approached by the dark side?
Oh, good question. I have. Well, I get those emails, yeah, a lot, but also targeted attacks as well. That obviously worries me a lot. I remember when I was doing a case for to help increase sentencing for a criminal in the States, but fortunately I worked with cyber security experts. I'm like, please look, check all my stuff, make sure I'm okay. And so getting them to just do a little bit of work around that. It does, I mean, I think cybersecurity people are, you know, more likely. And if people want to do a brute force attack, they will get you, unfortunately. The good news is, though, with some of these scams, actually, these people aren't that technically savvy, and they don't really need to be. So there's other people that do the more technically savvy stuff. They just need to be good at communicating. So actually, the brute force attacks, I don't have to worry about too much with some of these. So they're better at doing the communication and tricking you out of money. But yeah, I get that stuff all the time. But I also get the other side, which is a lot harder to deal with, is families and friends emailing me saying, I think my loved one is being scammed. I don't know how to pull them out of the scam. What can you do? And it's like, that's really hard. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there was a question down there.
Alex? Do you also see this come from national actors like spy agencies?
That's
China.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of, this is from what I know, like I'm more the psychology, what happens to victim stuff, but working in the field, you get to know a bit more. Different actors will do different things. So the more of the criminals in these types of scams are West Africa, Russia, you will get some China. And they aren't necessarily living in those countries, they're often expats in other countries, but it's organised crime. And so these organised criminals can work with other organised criminals. And so things like romance scams can actually be, some of that money actually supports terrorism and other activities.
What I have in mind is like really from national intelligence agency that they do similar things. Take advantage of that. You come across that as well. It's not just from criminals within a country, but from actual national intelligence agencies.
There's some things that I do work on that I can't discuss.
I was just wondering about, like, you mentioned the country-specific thing. Like, is it just as common to be scammed if you're living in West Africa?
Oh, good question.
Or is it like like really a sort of third world, you know, attacking first world kind of thing?
Yeah, I love that question because yes, it is, and yet the criminals will use the excuse, the rationalisation, that the English and the French, you know, they colonised us and treated us terribly, and we're all in this awful economic situation. So it doesn't matter that we get them; they deserve it. But they get their own people just as much. So yeah. And there's some work that I've done around that whole cultural piece as well. They bring in a lot of money, obviously, yeah. So, yeah, and of course, a lot of these criminals aren't living there anymore. So it's very hard to use that, you know, rationalisation. But yes, they will definitely. And it is a crime in these countries, but what they also will do is in their minds think, and I guess this is a cultural value, is say, look, if I nicked something from you, that's really bad. But if I tricked you out of it, you know, if I tricked you to give me your mobile phone, then not so bad. You're the stupid one that let me trick you. So that's kind of that's the rationalisation they employ to even get their own people in that too. Yeah.
So you mentioned that after telling a person that they were scammed, even after that, it's very hard to change their mind.
Yeah.
And I actually have seen that personally, and I was completely stunned because I'm a rational person. I'm a scientist. I think that once you give the arguments,
Yes.
then it's just going to steamroll over anything. So
Yes.
what can be done?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's because their belief system is so strong, that cognitive dissonance then it just pushes everyone away. And what the law enforcement used to say is, oh, we're 99%. And I said to them, never say that, because they'll look for that 1% that they still need to find. It's actually, in some ways, taking away things from them to be able to stop them. It's for some people, it's just virtually impossible. But I mean, not for everyone. Some success we've had is that we will go to a victim's house and say, we know you've been scammed. Don't tell us what's been happening. We'll tell you the story. And sometimes that's effective. But sometimes they'll say, yeah, I've heard about that woman, but I felt so sorry for her, but my love is real. I'm so sorry she didn't get that. And it's like, oh. So it is really hard. The other thing is, where we can, we'll work with family members to help support them, because they do want to support them often. Some they don't. And the other thing that we set up in the UK is actually a bit like an AA group. And so this is fitting with this kind of addiction kind of problem, that we brought them together to share their stories and help each other understand and help each other support each other, because a third of them will, even when it's all done, will get involved in another one. So this is to try and protect them. So that helped a little bit. The problem was the resources available. Like, we did all this as volunteer work in the UK for a small group to trial it out and see what we could do. But a lot more needs to be done there. That was probably the most effective method, yeah. The rationalisation, the clear story is like, yeah, as you say, you know, what else can I say to prove to you that this is a scam, yeah, and that all this money you've lost, you will never gain this back again. Just stop it. And yeah, and some of them are multiple, again, at different ones. So they'll go, okay, I won't do that one, and it's like, and then they'll do the next one that's going on perhaps at the same time. Yeah, it's really hard.
One more question.
Okay, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Please.
Is English more subject to this by being a global language? You know, if you live in a country with a relatively small language, are they much more safe from a lot of this?
Yes, good question. It used to be English and French, then German, but now no. ChatGPT, all our AI You don't need to. Yeah. So it makes it even harder now. So yes, it used to be. The other thing too that I didn't talk about, I work with computing scientists on NLP programming to detect. And so we've developed algorithms to detect in the language that they use. But this is going to become harder now as well. And it's not about poor grammar and spelling. Everyone thinks, oh, you can see it in that. It's actually quirky things that they leak out, but also misunderstandings about how to trick people as well. And when we first started doing that, the computer scientists came back to me with a bunch of stuff going, oh, they're lying about how much money they earn, the men. I'm like, you can take that one out of your algorithm, because guess what? All the men lie about that. So that's why it was useful to actually work together to go, let's refine this algorithm. And in the stuff that we did, we got pretty good accuracy, but it's an evolving field. And so AI is going to make it much easier for them to get over that stuff too.